Okay, I see the little symbol just popped up. Good to go?
Yep. It is just directing, so it should be fine. And we're live and ready when you are, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order. This is a work session, Monday, February 28th, 2022 at 4:30 p.m. And we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. And we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a number of discussion topics this evening to go over. And the first one will be on the overview of Seldovia budget process. And this will be on page 3 of the packet. And Rachel, I take it you'll be jumping in on this to start?
You bet, Mayor.
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Council, for being here, both in person and online. I just wanted to take a moment before we get into the heavier mechanics of the city's finances to go over the Seldovia budget process per code. So our budget is guided by Title III. You'll see that we're a fiscal year, which means that we begin July 1st and end June 30th every year. And in terms of the budget proposal itself, according to Title III, it says during or prior to the 8th week preceding the first day of the fiscal year, the manager will present to the council a budget proposal for the next fiscal year, which means that for us, for 2022, in preparation of our FY23 budget, we have to introduce the budget during the week of May 9th. And the most appropriate place would be for it to be introduced during our council meeting on May 9th. And then the budget should be adopted the week of May 23rd. And this allows the public and businesses and constituents to have time to adjust to any fee modifications the council may be making, but we can have a little bit of wiggle room if the budget can't be adopted that week. The last day would possibly be June 3rd. And so it goes over the fact that council reviews the budget. And I think it's very important to note that according to code 3.01.020, the proposed expenditures set forth in the budget proposal shall not exceed revenues by the city. So that's pretty key. Basically means that we can't spend more than we have. And also there's another section of code that says we have to pass a balanced budget. So there's other aspects to budget development, but that's just the first part I wanted to hit on this work session. And Mayor, I'm ready to go over discussion topic 2, the 10-year overview of the general fund and special revenue funds whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions on the first item that we just discussed? Okay, looks like we're ready. Go ahead and jump into number 2.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to share my screen, and I just need that to be enabled. Okay. So this next part of the work session is going over a look at our finances over the past 10 years. So FY10 through FY22. And I believe I've showed council 1 or 2 of these charts. And I'm now ready to have a formal discussion with the council regarding what I've been looking at for the past few months out of concern for the city and how we're operating. And so this part of the work session is going to discuss the general fund, as well as the 5 major special revenue funds, which is water, wastewater, the municipal dock, the boat haul out, storage yard, and the boat harbor. So we're going to start with the general fund. The blue line that you see is our fund balance, and it looks very wonky. And I can give at least a little bit of an insight as to why 2017 dipped so low. And then you'll see 4 bars, and they each represent something different. So the blue bar is what the city passed in its original budget for expenses, what we thought we were going to spend that upcoming fiscal year. Orange is what we actually spent, and those are audited figures. Gray is what we forecasted for revenue, and yellow is audited revenue actuals. And this is why FY21 and 22 don't have Those other colors don't have orange and yellow because we haven't received our audit statements yet. So if you just wanted to look at audited figures, it would be FY10, 2010 through FY 2020. So we're going to look at some outliers here when it comes to the general fund. The first dip we start to see when it comes to the general fund is between 2011 and 2012, which I don't know the reason why there was a dip other than the expenses, which you see here in orange, exceeded revenues, which you see here in yellow. And even though we exceeded what we thought we were going to make in FY 2012 by $95,000, that exceedance in our revenue prediction did not offset the actual expenses that the city incurred that year. I think the biggest outlier or point of interest to draw the council's attention to is here in FY 2017, when we saw our fund balance for the general fund dip to, I think that's it's over $800,000. It's $886,656, I believe. Now, we've talked about fund balance before. Fund balance is basically the revenues minus expenses since the inception of the fund. So that money that is in your fund balance isn't technically like real cash, but it is, if that makes sense. So throughout the year, the city's expenses and revenues fluctuate. So we don't always have like this one stable pot of revenue or money to pull from. It changes with the seasons of the city. But on paper and through our audit statements, it helps the city keep track of what our fund balance is for that fund. So it technically is another source of revenue that the city has access to. However, it's not always cash, like liquid cash, depending on what the year is. And we had a few council meetings ago, a video we watched about fund balance, which is posted on the FY22 agenda page. And I've had a couple other discussions about it, but I'm happy to answer more if council has any. So anyways, for FY 2017, our fund balance dipped significantly to almost negative $1 million. And the reason why that is, which is stated in our audit statement, is that in 2017, we transferred $886,656 from the general fund balance into other special revenue funds to match the fund balances in Cassell software. So the city spent a significant amount of money and time going from one accounting software to another, realized that accounting software, Cassell, was over our capacity as an organization and went to QuickBooks. And through that switching of accounting software, I guess the auditors at the time in the city at the time felt that we needed to make a series of transfers out of the general fund into other special revenue funds. So for example, in 2017, we took $328,234 from the general fund and put it into senior meals. We took $299,198 and put it into the Denali Commission Harbor Improvements Capital Project Fund. So I can't explain the amounts, but according to our audit statement, it was to reallocate fund balances to match the fund balances that were in Cassell software. So that's why you see that significant dip. In 2017 was the general fund was providing this fund balance revenue, so to speak, to all these other special revenue funds. I want to draw your attention to the fact that in this overview of the general fund from FY 2010 to FY 22, there were 6 out of the 12 years where revenues did not cover the expenses, meaning the expenditures exceeded our revenues and they eroded our fund balance down. I also think it's important to note that out of these 12 years, 9 had expenses where we forecasted a certain amount, but we exceeded it by a substantial amount. And so the first few pages of this part of the work session have the bar charts. And then if council wants to see the specific figures, if you just scroll through your packet a little bit more, you'll see the actual breakout of the figures. So for example, if you look at let's say 2012, it looked like we thought we were going to have expenses around $500,000. I'm just looking at the bar chart here. And in actuality, our expenses looked closer to $640,000. So we exceeded what we thought we were going to spend by over $100,000, which is pretty significant. Just from an organizational or audit standpoint, that's a pretty significant exceedance. So that's the general fund. Now just moving to water. Water it looks completely different compared to the general fund. It looks like over time, the city has steadily been increasing the fund balance, which is great. Up until FY20, FY21, when the city started factoring in expenses like audit fees and insurance to water, the fund balance was increasing. Again, you'll see a trend where some years the predicted amount of money the city was going to spend for water didn't align with reality, the actual expenses that we made. And this wouldn't be such a concern. However, the revenues didn't display that same tendency. You know, if we were saying we're going to spend 100,000, but we spend 150,000, and then we think to ourselves, we're going to make 100 grand in revenue, but we actually make 150,000, they would offset each other. But our revenue predictions have been less in some years than what we were hoping, while our expenditures exceeded what we thought we were going to make. So this is just a peek at water special revenue fund, so council can see that.
Rachel,
You bet.
before
Through
you
the mayor.
get too far
Yep,
down,
go ahead.
can I ask a question about back in the general fund? You talked about the dips and why they got there. Looking at between 2013 and 14, the blue line goes up substantially, and yet the expenses seem to stay the same. How did we recover that way? How did we do that?
That's an excellent question, Councilmember Nathan, and I can't give you an answer until I look at the audit statement. So kind of like FY17, when we transferred a bunch of money out of the general fund, I could speculate that perhaps in 2014, we transferred money into the general fund, but I don't know that off the top of my head. It's just so much information, but I could look into that for you.
All right, thank you.
You bet. So we were continuing on, and I'm happy to answer questions at any point. So feel free, council, to pause me. Our next major special revenue fund is wastewater or sewer. And this also appears very interesting to look at over a 10-year period, in that our fund balance has actually been significantly over the revenue and normal revenue trends and expenditure trends of the city. And I think it's just because our system is so low maintenance. It doesn't have significant operating costs, except when there's like a catastrophic failure of something, or perhaps like matching grant funds or something like that. You still see the trend of the city spending more than it initially forecasted. And that's a trend consistent throughout the city funds. But overall, the sewer special revenue fund is, relatively speaking, in a better state. You still see a decline of the fund balance of the wastewater special revenue fund. And again, similar to water, it's because we're factoring in costs like audit fees and insurance. And this mountain you see here for FY17 should look familiar. It looks like that dip, the inverse dip we saw in the general fund, and that's because this was one of the special revenue funds that received a surplus of fund balance from the general fund. Actually, I take that back. It did not. I was confusing water and wastewater. I'm sorry. I don't know the reason for that mountain in the wastewater, but I can look that up and get that to council. Sorry, no, I'm sorry. I'm talking in circles here because it's so much information. It was a transfer from the general fund of almost $89,000. So the general fund in 2017 put $89,000 from the general fund balance into wastewater. And then you see it dip so drastically because then the next year we took that same amount and transferred it back into the general fund. So again, I don't understand the mechanics behind those aspects to our audit statements, but all of our audit statements are available through the state of Alaska, and the link is on the city's budget webpage if anyone wants to explore that further. So again, this increase is because the general fund put 90 grand basically into wastewater, and then the next year took it out.
Can I bother you one more time?
You bet, it's not a bother. Through the mayor.
Yep, go ahead.
Since we're constantly underestimating expenditure, or overestimating expenditures and underestimating revenue, the blue line is saying substantially above. Should we be squirreling away part of that back into water and sewer so that when we do have a dip, we don't have to rob the general fund?
Councilmember Nathan, you ask an excellent question, and we're going to get to that in a couple of meetings and doing a lot of research into all of the water and sewer improvement plans the city already has in place. I discovered a document called the 2008 Water and Sewer Main Business Plan, in which the city was supposed to establish rates and input $26,000 every year into our major maintenance and repair fund for water and sewer, and we haven't been following that plan, even though it was adopted by council through resolution. So we can talk about that in the next coming meetings, but that's a great point, and we'll get to that once we talk water and sewer rates more in depth.
Thank you.
You bet. So here is the Boat Harbor Special Revenue Fund, and I'm not going to spend really any time on this because the harbor master and harbor master's assistant kind of went through this with the council at the meeting where we talked about the harbor rate study. The important thing is just to note, again, you see the exceedances of expenditures versus what we predicted, and the revenue actuals aren't enough to offset the exceedance of expenses. And this blue line here is the fund balance, and this year will be the 8th year that the fund, the Boat Harbor Special Revenue Fund, has been operating at a deficit. Municipal dock, similar to wastewater, in that the fund balance is over the typical revenue and expenditure trends you see. You'll see that same mountain spike in 2017, and that's again money from the general fund that went into the municipal dock and then got taken out in 2018 and put back into the general fund. Here you don't see exceedances of expenses compared to forecasted versus actuals as much as the other funds, and this, similar to wastewater, is a low maintenance fund, in that we're not, even though there's a lot of deferred maintenance needs, we're not on a regular basis spending a lot of money on the municipal dock. And like water and wastewater, we see here in FY 21-22, the fund balance dipping because we factored in audit fees and insurance fees. And I believe this is the last fund. Let me check here. This is the boat haul out special revenue fund. And again, overall, a low maintenance fund for the city. It's in pretty good standing looking at that fund balance and how high up it is compared to the revenue and expenditure trends of the boat haul out services that the city provides. So this is this fund on paper. And then, as mentioned earlier, if you want to work with the figures and not just the bar charts, there are 6 pages of the actuals, the forecasted expenses, actual expenses, forecasted revenue, actual revenue, and the fund balance all pulled from our audit statements available for the council as well. So I just wanted to point out a few things to the council. So overall trends, when you're looking at the general fund and the 5 major special revenue funds, the city frequently exceeds its budget forecasts in terms of what we're going to spend. The city predicts revenues as being higher than what they actually are. There are years where the budget forecast for one fiscal year is identical to the next year, which implies that the forecasted budget amounts that are coming before the council are not based on audited actuals. So let me show you what I mean by that. We're going to look at the number chart here for the municipal dock. Let me find that. So here's the municipal dock. You'll see that in FY 14, 15, and 16, the city received permission from the council to spend $68,300. And oftentimes that's pretty rare for the fiscal year to have the same budget amount request. And if you look at the actuals, you'll see that they varied. And if the city had been developing the budget based on a 3-year historical trend where you take the audited actuals for the past 3 years and then use that as the starting point to setting your upcoming budget in conversation with staff, you would have a more realistic forecast for that budget. So that's what I mean when looking at the budget, it appears that for at least some of the funds during some of the years, the forecasted budget amounts are not based on audited actuals. Also, in upcoming discussions with the council, based on these charts, the city will need to focus on other ways we can generate significant amounts of revenue or cut back significantly on expenses, which means that rates need to be adjusted in addition to drastic changes. I wanted to let the council know that the FY21 audit will be available next month, and council will be reviewing the audit like we normally do on an annual basis, and then that'll help show you guys our most up-to-date financial standing. And I hope that by also showing you these charts, it overall is showing that we as a team can more clearly see that how we've been operating in the past and how we're operating currently is not working for the city. And so now that we have a vision of what's been going on, we can take positive steps towards making our future better for the city's budgeting. So for FY23, I'm hoping that the practices that we've seen, at least the trends for the past 10 years, aren't put in again, if that makes sense. So for FY22, that budget was developed on a historical trend analysis using audited actuals for the past 3 years, which was greatly appreciated by the auditors. And that's a practice that we'll continue to put in place from here on out. And I'm available for any questions the council may have.
Okay, anyone have any questions on the second action item tonight, or the second agenda item tonight? Okay. Continuing on.
Okay, next topic here, which is general fund and special revenue fund balances, setting targets. This is starting on page 18 of your packet and should look familiar. We've had a discussion before about what fund balance means and what are the policies that other Alaskan municipalities have in place when it comes to fund balance. So starting on page 18, you'll see that the Government Finance Officers Association says that a municipality should have no less than 2 months of regular general fund operating revenues or regular general fund operating expenditures. There's the Kenai Peninsula Borough, Homer is provided, Juneau, Kenai, and Kodiak. So on page 21 of your packet, I provided council with what it would look like for the general fund and the 5 special revenue funds if we had a 2-month fund balance. And I broke this out based on expenses as well as revenue, using a 5-year average of audited actuals from FY 2016 to FY 2020 to come up with those figures. I then did the same thing for 4 months, just looking at how much of a difference a 4-month fund balance would be for those special funds. And that's on page 22. Special funds as well as the general fund. And so I believe since the city is just getting started with this concept of setting a fund balance target, I think we should pursue a fund balance that's equal to 2 months of revenue for each of the funds. And so the idea is by having a target fund balance, the council can continue to make sure that revenues exceed expenditures, that we're growing our fund balance. So that way, if there's a lull or a disruption in service, the city has enough revenue at least for 2 months for these services to continue uninterrupted. Initially, I was also thinking in the past that the fund balance should cover the cost of assets held by those funds. So for example, looking at the valuation of all of our assets in the general fund. So what's the worth of all of our roads, all of the equipment that works on our roads, the police truck, the multi-purpose building, the public facilities. But I don't think that should be factored into fund balance because fund balance is operating and all of those costs are capital. So we can set separate targets for capital needs with major maintenance and repair. So that's a completely separate discussion that I did touch base on with council. And after thinking it through a little bit more, I don't think we need to factor in capital asset expenses to a fund balance target. Instead, we should just be looking at operating and specifically 2 months of operating revenue for each of these funds. So I wanted to get the council's input on that because the FY23 budget will incorporate that information and it'll be a set target so that council can see what we're working towards.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Any comments on what the manager just said? Jennifer, you got your hand up?
Yeah. I like the idea of setting a target. We're doing 2 months of revenue or covering 2 months of expenses?
I was thinking
Or
2
should
months.
it be the same?
Oh, I was thinking 2
No.
months of operating revenue, Councilmember Swick, and they look a little bit different on paper. So like on page 21, it just depends on which fund you're talking about. So 2 months total for the general fund based on revenue is 109,000. If you look at expenditures for the general fund, it's 119,000. So I feel like 2 months is a conservative, more attainable first goal for the city. And the city could then work towards switching it to expenses or extending the length of time from 2 months to 3 months or 4 months in the future. But for a starting point, I thought 2 months of operating revenues was a good place for the city.
Okay, did that
Thanks.
answer your question, Jen?
Yeah.
Okay. Vivian, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm totally in favor of going with the 2 months, setting that track. And I thought maybe it wasn't this council, but I thought another council, we did discuss this before about setting the city in a position so we're actually putting aside for a rainy day. So I'm totally in favor of this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Vivian.
Mayor Campbell,
Yep, go ahead, John.
hey, I like it. And some of the questions I had, Jen was able to already pull them from you. The big question I had is, the 2 months is, I think 2 is a good starting point, but how many years, if we were successful, do you think it'd take for us to get to the 4 months? I mean, it'd be difficult, I guess. We got a lot of work in front of us and we're going to have to look at everything we can to balance this, but I'd like to see us in a little better position for sure.
You bet. Through the mayor, Councilmember Kennedy, that's a great point. And if we just were to look at general fund revenues for 4 months, that's basically 220,000 versus 2 months revenue, which is 110. So basically half. So how long would it take the city to double
Right.
the fund balances for the accounts? And that answer to that question is up to council. How aggressive?
I get that.
Yeah. How aggressive do you guys want to be at making cuts and
Right.
increasing revenues to build up the fund balance?
I mean, even if we were moderately aggressive, the same as our investments, at least we could see some end results.
Absolutely.
That's where I'm at with that.
Well, and one thing we have to keep in mind here too is, I mean, I'm totally in favor of this too, but we also have to go in mind, we all want to improve our position, and which we're on track to do that just by simply even talking about it and implementing a plan in writing and then sticking to the plan. We don't want to go too draconian here to where, we get ourselves in an operational pinch again here and we start really feeling the pain and not being able to, provide services. So it's going to be a delicate operation, if you will, to, balance the needs of what we need to provide and then what we need to do to become financially independent moving, or more financially stable moving forward.
Mayor Campbell,
Yep, go ahead.
I'm certainly not suggesting that we do that. I just would like to see us continue with these type of thoughts and move forward.
Yeah, no, understood. And I'm not saying anything different. I think what the manager's saying is, we come up with something here, we talk about it, we come up with a plan, we get it implemented, we get it codified, and then moving forward, I think as we review our balances every year going forward, then obviously we can start making some adjustments to this. I mean, to me, I see this as a tool. Once the concept's in place, then it could be something that, may be amended every year if we, depending on what the results are.
Correct. And that's exactly what I was getting at. The city manager has mentioned that they had a plan in place and then it wasn't acted upon. So I think, semi-annual or annual reviews of the plan would be good so that we can make forward progress, even if it's slightly.
And
Yep,
Mayor,
yep.
if I may add to that comment,
Yep, go ahead.
Councilmember Kennedy, something that the city hadn't done in the past, which I've been talking to the council about over the past few months, is ensuring that every budget that's brought before the council has fund balance shown on it, because it's another way of assessing the city's financial position. And so this will be a new practice, at least for the past however many budgets the council has seen, to help with exactly what you're talking about and what the mayor's talking about, is another tool to assess our position and see if we can change it over time, because we're working towards bettering the organization.
Mr. Mayor,
Yep, go ahead, George.
we're all talking about 2 months revenue, not 2 months expenditures.
Correct.
Maybe it might be better to think about 2 months expenditures rather than revenues, at least to begin with. Again, I could see where we have some catastrophe happen and end up having to just go back on that anyway. How does the 200,000 or 200 and whatever thousand rainy day fund fit into this picture?
Through the mayor, that's completely separate. So the major maintenance and repair fund is actual cash, actual liquid cash that the city can tap at any time, whereas fund balance is money, so to speak. But I guess an example to give is our Wells Fargo account could have a balance of, 100 grand in it to operate the whole city. But let's say the general fund has a fund balance of 300,000. Technically, the general fund has a $300,000 cushion, but you couldn't say, oh my gosh, we've had a landslide, we need to do major road repairs, and pull $300,000 because the city technically doesn't have that as liquid cash. So that's the big difference between the two, is fund balance shows since the fund's inception how revenues and expenditures have fluctuated, whereas major maintenance and repair, we've made deposits into it. It's a quick source of cash.
So basically, one's a savings account and one's a checking account. That's the simplest way to look at it.
But they're still purposed the same way.
Right. You theoretically you could, but does that align with what the city actually has on hand at that time? Like the revenue from the harbor for mortgage fees that comes in and floods, I think March, April. But if the harbor had a major issue before then, we might not have that amount of cash to contribute towards the repair of something.
We're talking about salting away a percentage of all of those funds in order to build this 2-month cushion.
Yeah, it would just be a target on your on the budget statement. So we're not moving money anywhere. It's just, here's the general fund. Here's our forecasted expenses and revenues for FY23. This is our target. Here's, after looking at how the revenue and expenses play out for FY23, here's what our fund balance will be in FY23. And here's where we're trying to get to. So it's like showing the future state we want to get to. And I'd be happy to meet with you more in person to talk it out too.
I probably have enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, George. Anyone else? Okay, thank you for that, Rachel. We'll move on to number 4. Next item is results of the Closing the Gap survey.
You bet. So let's see.
It's be on page 23 of your packet.
Yes, page 23 in the packet. So our executive administrative assistant, Diane Gruber, compiled all of the information in the surveys. The city received 14 over the period of a month from the public. And so we went ahead and compiled them all based on the question. If there were multiple surveys that said something similar, they got a higher number of votes. So that's what you see in parentheses there. And then items highlighted in blue aligned with what staff had proposed as well as things that the city could consider when reviewing its gap between the amount of money it takes to operate the city and how much revenue we generate. And staff's feedback can be found starting on page 30 of the packet. But this is the first time that the council has seen the survey results from the public compiled in one place. And so I'm looking for comments or feedback from the council of, are there any comments that the public or staff submitted in the survey process that you would like to see administration, myself, explore further for the council? So I know that's pretty open-ended and there's a lot of information there, but maybe there's an item or two that really stood out to you as something the city should look into. Thanks for your feedback.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Anyone have any initial comments or thoughts?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yep, go ahead, Vivian.
Yeah, this is a great list of feedback that we received. Interesting idea about increasing the rate or the fee that we charge the sea otter recovery unit. I think that's a potential idea to consider. In the blue, the blue is what now? Oh, what the city staff suggested. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, council member Rojas, if you look at the memo compiling all staff feedback, I tried to compare both documents so council could see, this is feedback we received from the public that also matches some of the things that staff said. It doesn't weight it any other way. It's just kind of trying to get the documents to talk to one another because they're both pretty long.
Right. It's interesting to see what the public has come up with, some good things to consider. It almost seems like to me, if we're serious about looking this over, we should go item by item or have a discussion all on its own, or maybe this is what you're asking for right now, about what we would like to see our to increase revenue. What do we really want want to concentrate on. And it's nice to see some of the same things the public came up with are things that we've been considering anyhow. That's it for right now, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Any more comments on this? I'll just chime in here. Yeah, there's any number of these things. I mean, we've talked about, just about every single thing on here has been discussed at some point, in the past. So I know there's a couple of them, like say, for example, renegotiate the fuel and lube lease. There's a couple of those. I don't know if legally we can do that with, there was a provisional term set up on that. There's, some of these things where we've talked about the passenger tax on commercial boats. I see there's, something here on head tax on commercial planes. I don't know about that one. I know the boat one is real, and we just recently talked about that. I think that is something that we should definitely be looking at for this year. We've talked about parking. I know that's going to come up again. So yeah, there's I don't know if there's anything on this list that's not certainly open for discussion at some point here. It's just going to be a matter of, which ones we can attack and, think we can successfully implement, quickly rather than a long drawn out process. Some of these will be a short term, quick. Others won't be so easy and will take a long period of time. Anyone else?
Mayor Campbell,
Yep, go ahead, John.
I just think this survey would probably be a good tool as we begin to go through this budget, in the next few months, and see what ideas here we might be able to implement, as you and Vivian both said, and what stuff is, completely out of line. Interesting for me was the Sea Otter Center rent. That wasn't interesting. It's new to me, but and I'm not picking on them, certainly by no means. But if that's true, they should probably receive an increase just like everybody else is across the board. So I'm just curious, what other things on that list that might be low hanging fruit that might be able to help us. That's all. And I think the list ought to be reviewed at the same time we do the budget stuff.
Okay, thank you, John.
Mr. Mayor,
Yep, go ahead, Harmony.
just for clarification, I believe the Sea Otter Recovery Unit that John just mentioned, that's actually the structure down by Pearlie's over there. I don't know about their rental agreement, but they do hire an administrative position locally, and just so that John is aware that this is not the same as the Sea Otter Center, the Sea Otter, the recreational center up by the school. This is a currently unused structure implemented for oil recovery response for marine mammals. Sorry, I don't know why I felt that I need to state that, but just so that we're all on the same page on what that is.
Yep, thanks for clarifying that, Harmony.
Mayor, if I may.
Yep, go ahead, Rachel.
So we can definitely bring this document before council when the FY23 budget is being discussed. And I would say too that council and the city are already working on some of the things that are on this list. So it's a great tool to show the public, these are the steps that we've been taking to look at how we've been operating. And another way that council could look at it, if there isn't one that particularly stands out to you, is to see which one got the most votes. And, that's your constituency trying to communicate something in particular. And so that's another way to whittle down the list, because the city isn't obligated to address all of them. This is just public feedback, and the city can decide which ones would be great for us to pursue, and we can even set a time limit. So, we're working, for example, on the permanent fund and getting it reinvested. So that's during this first year, and then, maybe year 2, we look at setting aside funds or finding funding to help us remove more derelict vessels from the boat haul out storage yard. Little steps, but it's a tool that we can do annually, even to assess the public's opinion and get feedback from the public. That's all I had on this, unless there's any other item that the council would like.
I think Jennifer's got her hand up here.
Okay. Yeah, I agree that more of them should be looked into. It's so across the board to just look at this one document and try and compare apples to oranges. I don't know if it would be effective to pull the common ideas, when we talk about the specific things like the harbor and the boat haul out and the land use, to have those presented at that time to think of whether they'll be optional or not. Because we can't just discuss this document because it's so much and you'll get down all kinds of rabbit holes. And but I definitely love to talk about some of them more, just in a appropriate time frame, I guess.
Eric Campbell.
If that makes
I actually like Rachel's ideal. I actually like Rachel's idea of the ones with the most votes are probably a good way to prioritize that, because it is public opinion, and that might be something we could look at.
Yeah, unfortunately, if there was there's a lot of 1s and 2s that are, kind of all grouped together here. Unfortunately, if we had a lot more people, then we might have a wider range on the vote tally here. So, but yeah, there's a lot of good ideas on here for sure. And I think as I'm hearing, I think they're all on the table here.
Mr. Mayor,
Okay,
if I may have just.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, as Rachel said and everyone else on council, to use this for a template. And I like Jennifer's idea is when we're discussing, let's not forget, if we're discussing the parking, let's pull out what's been written down and voted on. When we're discussing the boat yard, let's pull out let's use this for a guide for. So I think it's a great document that we've got to start on, and we can use it in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep. Thank you, Vivian. Okay, if there's no other comments on that one, we can move on to number 5, which is how our services compare to other communities of similar size. And this will be on page 34 of your packet.
Thank you, Mayor. So another way of trying to present council information. So, I've been trying to group the topics somewhat related to each other. So you could see what it costs to provide the 6 major services or 6 major funds that support the services of the city. So you have an overview of what those look like. Let's see, fund balance targets and what it takes to operate those the services provided out of those funds on a sustainable basis. So setting targets for that. You've heard from the public, at least 14 members of the public. And it's not restricted to people in city limits. There could also be people from outside of city limits who completed that survey. I wanted to make sure I said that. But we reviewed the results from the survey. And so now we're looking at, well, what are some other communities in Alaska and what services do they provide? And just providing the council with a snapshot to see how we compare. Because we became a first-class city in 1962 and a lot has changed since then. And so up top, you can see the city of Seldovia, we're a manager form of government, population 226. And by the way, this is data that I got from the Alaska Municipal League in 2021. You can see our services, that we have a planning commission. You can see our mill rate, the other taxes we charge, and our full-time staff, which was estimated in 2021. So I just tried to pull from this directory that had hundreds of cities, or it felt like hundreds of cities, and find ones that could possibly align with the city. So for example, the city and borough of Yakutat, they have a manager form of government, 540 people. Here are their services. They do have a planning commission. Their property tax rate is 7.6 mils, and they have a variety of taxes and 15 staff. If you go down to city of Adak, which is a second-class city with a population a little bit closer to ours, they are a manager form of government. They don't have a planning commission. Those are the services in that box, piped water and sewer, roads, landfill, fire, police, etc. They do not charge property tax, and they have 3 different types of taxes: sales tax, bed tax, and raw fish tax. And they have 14 and a half staff for full-time equivalent staff. And so I just wanted to provide this information to council because as we're looking ahead to the upcoming fiscal year, and the city is trying to figure out how do we generate revenue and reduce expenses that directly ties to services and services that are supported by staff. So I wanted council to see what other cities of a comparable size or type provide or do for their residents. And I hope that I had wanted to accomplish, but it was too time intensive, was to also show the council what the budgets were looking like for those communities. So how much revenue did Bristol Bay Borough have for FY21 versus expenses, just so that's another way to see what these communities look like on paper. So that was the point of providing this information.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep, go ahead.
Rachel, can you break down the mill rate here for us as borough and city?
Councilmember Nathan, not off the top of my head. I know that we are 7.5 mils, I believe.
Is ours?
Is ours, or I can't remember if that was our mill rate or if that's what it was proposed to be. I'm sorry, I can't remember that off the top of my head. And then there's the borough. And then if you're outside of city limits, I believe you have the hospital, but I can try and pull that up. Oh, the city clerk has me covered here.
She's probably quick on Google.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, if I may, so for Seldovia, the entire mill rate for people inside the city limits is 12.95. 7.5 is for Seldovia. 0.75 is for the Seldovia RCAC. So that's the SOC up there. And 4.7 is for the borough. For areas outside of city limits, where they're at 7.97 mils.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. Okay, any additional comments on the comparison chart?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yep, go ahead, Vivian.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. It's a good document to look at and see how we are comparable. Interesting, the populations and the recent or the number of staff that they have. I'm trying to figure out how they can do that, and with their population and the low staff. I'm just kind of looking at it, trying to figure out how they're doing that. But no, a great document to look at. Thank you for putting it together.
Thank you, Vivian.
If I may respond.
Yep, go ahead.
So Councilmember Rojas, that's a great point. And it's, just makes me want to ask the question, do those communities outsource those services? So they don't have to have like local employment through the city, they contract out. So, looking at the city of Thorn Bay, perhaps they, similar to what the Kenai Peninsula Borough does here, maybe they contract out their landfill, contract out gravel and road maintenance. And so that's a way that the city, still is able to provide that service, but not through local employment, and personnel costs are very expensive. They're typically the highest cost for an organization aside from regular maintenance of assets. And so perhaps that's a way that municipality tries to reduce costs.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, any other comments, questions on the chart here? Okay, we'll go and move on to item number 6, and this is talking about grant assistance for capital project needs and how the capital projects tie into our budget.
Thank you, Mayor. So earlier this year, we had a presentation from a local Seldovian who is a grant writer in Seldovia, and she briefed the council on grants in general, why it's important to be very strategic with what grants you're targeting, making sure that they align with your needs and that you can manage them successfully. And so I just wanted to take a quick minute because I know that there's community feedback for the city to pursue grants. And so I just wanted to talk about how grants help with capital projects, because grants typically do not cover operating expenses. It's different for our senior meals program. And sometimes you can find a one-off grant where it'll support police services for a year to give a particular type of training. But grants typically help organizations with capital improvements. That's the first part. Grants can help cover administrative fees. So you get this grant. I've seen a few grants say that they'll cover 5% of the cost to administer the grant because it comes in, revenue comes in, invoicing comes in. Sometimes you can put insurance costs or workman's comp costs on that. So some grants will help you cover the administrative fees associated with administering the grant. You can also get grants that cover the salaries of your staff because you're having your staff perform the work. So forced accounting versus contractual labor. So, the city receives a grant to repair a road. Well, now we can hire our guys through that grant. So it essentially covers their salary and lowers our operating expenses while simultaneously making a capital improvement. Some of the things that Seldovia should think about when it comes to grants, especially with the onslaught of grants that are coming our way through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, is that a lot of these grants require local matches. And sometimes that local match can be 20%. So it's very difficult when it comes to a city of Seldovia size. And let's say we have a project that's estimated to be $15 million. How is the city going to find 20% match to that? Another thing that's really difficult with grants that the city should keep in mind is that, at least for these bipartisan infrastructure bill grants, from what I've seen, a lot of them are reimbursable, meaning they don't give the city money. The city has to incur the cost, then charge it to the granting agency, and then they reimburse us. So let's say we had an invoice for $750,000 for a float replacement. How would we cover that cost? So that's another challenge with looking to grants to solve our capital improvement challenges. And this I just pulled from the survey, the Closing the Gap survey, is that the cities should secure grants that specifically assist the city with reducing operating expenses and improving services rather than creating new ones. So the city looks to make its buildings more efficient. So we're lowering the operating costs of, heating fuel and other utilities. We fix water leaks, which then reduces the leaks to our water treatment plant system. But grants like, I think of them as like sparkly grants that are trying to create a new service or a new facility at this time, I don't think align with what the city needs to focus its attention on, which is taking care of what we already have. If it's something sparkly that also improves something that we have, great. But, we have the value added building and trying to figure out how to even get that grant funded asset operating and usable. That in itself is a challenge, and we don't want to see another one of those happen in Seldovia. So just wanted to take a moment to talk about how great grants are and how they can help accomplish a lot of capital projects, but at least with some of the ones that we're considering, they have challenges or hurdles that the city has to figure out how to conquer, like the local match requirement, the fact that it's reimbursable, those types of challenges. And then they have ways they can help the city by offsetting salary costs of staff that can perform the work of the grant, as well as covering our administrative fees. So Mayor, that is all I had on this topic. I just wanted to make sure I brought that to the council's attention.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that, that update. Anyone have any questions for the city manager on grants? Okay. We will, if we've got time here, obviously we do, we'll go ahead and open it up to the public. If there's anyone that wishes to speak either in person or online. And Heidi, you can just let me know.
Just for a moment, Mr. Mayor, we do have one in tonight, which state your name for the record, please.
We're having some audio feedback issues here.
Heidi, you entered a long tunnel.
Yep. There, I can hear you just fine, Laurel. You're coming in
Okay.
loud and clear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a chance to just look over that chart about comparable Alaskan municipal organizations. And being that I lived in Yakutat, so it drew my attention to it. So I just wanted to say that in regards to those first two organizations that we're comparing to, those being boroughs, of course, are funded vastly differently than a city would be funded. And for example, with the city and borough of Yakutat, they cover a large area, like up to Icy Bay and down below them as well. So their funding is going to stream a lot differently from the state and the federal government. And then when you look at the services that city and borough of Yakutat is providing, they actually provide the school district, which is pretty exciting, but they do not provide the health clinic, and they do not provide the airport. So the airport is a DOT airport, and the health clinic is provided by the tribal government. So those were just a couple notes when you're looking at comparison. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Laurel. Okay. Anyone else, Heidi?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this time, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. And you are coming in loud and clear there as well. So that sounds good. Okay. Any other closing comments from council this evening before we adjourn this one and get ready for our regular meeting tonight? Okay. Well, Rachel, thank you and the staff for putting all this information together. As usual, always lots of good information. And then obviously we're coming into our budget cycle here shortly. So a lot of this stuff we will be reviewing again and using as we move along through the budget process going forward. So this was probably a good time to have this work session and bring these up as a little reminder before we head into the budget cycle here.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
So, all right, well, if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Then we'll meet back here in about 25 minutes for our regular council meeting tonight at 6 p.m. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. See you in a minute.
Just take off.